The three-lane highway stretched through Oklahoma like a scar across weathered skin. Pine trees swayed in the afternoon heat as Maya Jenkins gripped the steering wheel of her battered sedan. Her knuckles were white against the cracked vinyl, her service uniform crisp despite the sweltering temperature. The engine had been making that sound again, a wheeze that reminded her of her grandfather's last breaths in the VA hospital. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. For 3 years, Maya's car had sat in her driveway in Tallahassee, collecting dust and judgment from neighbors who whispered about the strange veteran lady who never left her house. The grocery deliveries, the closed curtains, the way she'd duck behind her mailbox when people walked by, all painted a picture she'd grown comfortable hiding behind. But then the letter came. Maya pulled over at a rest stop and unfolded the worn piece of paper for the 100th time. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakably real. Captain Jenkins, my name is Thomas Wilson. I was with the 10th Mountain Division in Iraq, 2019. Your friend Sarah Chan saved my life outside Fallujah. Before she died, she made me promise to find you if I ever made it home. She said, you'd understand what that meant. The letter had been waiting for her for 2 years. Thomas had tracked her down through VA records, persistent as a bloodhound. In his final paragraph, he'd written something that made her hands shake every time she read it. She said you'd promise to wear your uniform again someday, to show the world what real leadership looks like. She said you'd chicken out, but that someone would have to remind you that promises to the dead are the only ones that really matter. Sarah's photograph sat propped against the dashboard. 2 young women in combat gear, grinning like they owned the world. The photo had been taken 3 days before the mission that changed everything. Before Fallujah, before the choice that still woke Maya up screaming. The car coughed, sputtered, then died completely. No, 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 Maya muttered, coasting toward the shoulder. Steam rose from under the hood like a surrender flag. She managed to pull off near a chain-link fence, close enough to see the military checkpoint in the distance. A sign read, Fort Hamilton, authorized personnel only. She popped the hood and stared at the mess of hoses and metal. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the rhythmic sound of soldiers marching, their cadence echoing across the hot asphalt. It was a sound that used to comfort her. Now it just reminded her of everything she'd lost. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maya crawled under the car with her toolbox, sweat already beading on her forehead. The gravel bit into her knees, but she'd endured worse. As she worked, she found herself talking to Sarah's photograph. I know what you're thinking, Sarah. Took you long enough, Maya. Well, better late than never, right? She didn't notice the military Humvee approaching until it was too late. 3 soldiers climbed out, their boots crunching on the gravel. They were young, maybe 22 at most, with the kind of crisp uniforms and serious expressions that screamed fresh out of basic training. Ma'am, the tallest one called out, his voice carrying that particular blend of authority and uncertainty that comes with new stripes. This is a restricted area. You can't park here. Maya didn't look up from her work. Didn't park. Broke down. Different thing. Another soldier chimed in, consulting his clipboard like it held the secrets of the universe. This is federal property. You'll need to call a tow truck and move along. I'm fixing it, Maya said simply, her wrench finding purchase on a stubborn bolt. Give me 15 minutes. That's not how this works, ma'am, the clipboard soldier's voice took on an edge. We can't allow unauthorized personnel to loiter near the perimeter. It's a security risk. Maya slid out from under the car, wiping her hands on her jeans. Her tank top was soaked with sweat, but the duffel bag in her trunk held her perfectly pressed uniform, the one she hadn't worn in 3 years. She could feel the familiar ache in her lower back, a gift from that IED outside Baghdad. She looked at the 3 soldiers, seeing herself in their eager faces. I'm not loitering, she said calmly. I'm stranded. Big difference. The third soldier, who'd been quiet until now, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the vehicle. We're calling this in." It was then that Maya felt it. That old familiar burn in her chest. The same feeling she'd had when bureaucrats at the VA told her that her PTSD claim was inconclusive. The same feeling when her own family had stopped calling because she was too difficult to be around. But this time, she didn't back down. "Call whoever you want," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I'm not moving until this car is running, and I'm not abandoning it." She stopped herself, the words catching in her throat. "Like I abandoned her." The soldiers exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping into their professional facades. The tallest one reached for his radio, but before he could speak, the sound of approaching tires cut through the afternoon heat. A black SUV with government plates pulled up slowly, its windows tinted dark enough to hide secrets. Maya's heart began to race, but not from fear. Something about the vehicle's measured approach, the way it positioned itself with clear sight lines, it reminded her of the way Sarah used to scout a perimeter. The engine shut off, and for a moment, the only sound was the distant echo of military cadence and the tick-tick-tick of cooling metal. Maya glanced at the photograph on her dashboard, Sarah's smile seeming to wink in the afternoon sun. "Well, girl," she whispered. "Looks like this is where it gets interesting." The SUV's door opened with the soft thunk of expensive engineering, and Colonel James Sullivan stepped out into the Oklahoma heat. Maya could read rank and authority in the way he moved, measured, deliberate, like a man who'd learned that every gesture carried weight. The three soldiers snapped to attention so fast Maya thought they might give themselves whiplash. "What's the situation here?" Colonel Sullivan asked, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made people listen without being told to. "Sir," the clipboard soldier, apparently the corporal, replied. "We have a perimeter breach. Civilian vehicle broken down in the restricted zone. Subject is refusing to comply with orders to evacuate." Maya almost laughed at being called a subject, but something in the colonel's posture made her pause. He was scanning the scene with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen real conflict, not just peacetime exercises. "I see," Sullivan said, his gaze moving from the soldiers to Maya, then to her car. "And the nature of the mechanical failure?" "Sir, that's not really," the corporal began. "Cool and hose," Maya interrupted, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "Cracked fitting. 20-minute fix if these boys would stop treating me like a terrorist." One of the younger soldiers bristled. "Ma'am, we're just following protocol." "Protocol," Maya repeated, and there was something in her voice that made the word sound like a curse. "You know what protocol got me? A Purple Heart and a medical discharge. You know what it got my best friend? A flag-draped coffin." The colonel's eyes sharpened. Something in Maya's tone, her posture, the way she carried herself despite the grease stains and sweat, it was familiar. "Professional." "Corporal," Sullivan said quietly. "Give me a moment with the lady." The three soldiers stepped back, though Maya could see them watching from the corner of their eyes. Sullivan approached slowly, his hands visible and relaxed, the body language of someone who understood that respect was earned, not demanded. "You served," he said. It wasn't a question. Maya nodded, her jaw tight. 12 years, until I couldn't anymore." "What unit?" For a moment, Maya considered lying or deflecting. It would be easier than explaining something that officially never existed. But the way Sullivan asked, with genuine curiosity rather than interrogation, made her decision for her. She straightened slightly, meeting his gaze with a defiance she hadn't felt in years. "You've heard of the 7th Special Operations Group?" Sullivan's breath caught. His eyes widened for just a moment before professional composure reasserted itself. "The Phantom Unit," he said quietly. "You operated out of Camp Victory. You've heard of us?" Maya's surprise was genuine. "I served with Support Command, 2018 to 2019, Forward Operating Base Echo." He paused, studying her face. "You're Maya Jenkins." The name hung in the air between them like a dropped grenade. Maya felt her chest tighten. She'd spent 3 years trying to forget that name, to bury it under layers of isolation and self-medication. But here it was, spoken with something that sounded almost like reverence. She said finally. Now I'm just someone trying to keep a promise. Sullivan's expression softened. Sarah Chen. Maya's composure cracked for just a moment. You knew her? I knew of her. We all did. The woman who held Fallujah sector while the rest of us got our people out. He glanced at the photograph visible through the car's windshield. She's the reason 47 soldiers made it home. She's the reason I'm still here, Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. The colonel stood in silence for a moment. Then slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand to his temple in a perfect salute, sharp, precise, and filled with the kind of respect that can't be faked. Behind him, the 3 young soldiers watched in stunned silence as their commanding officer saluted a woman in a greasy tank top. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't been saluted in 3 years, hadn't been seen as anything other than a problem to be managed or a case to be closed. But here, on a hot stretch of Oklahoma asphalt, a colonel was acknowledging not just her service, but her sacrifice. She straightened her shoulders and returned the salute. Corporal, Sullivan said without breaking eye contact with Maya. I want a mechanic from the motor pool here in 10 minutes. Full service, whatever she needs. Sir, yes, sir, the corporal stammered. And Corporal, Sullivan's voice carried a warning. This woman is to be treated with the same respect you'd show me. Is that understood? Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. As the soldiers hurried to their radio, Sullivan turned back to Maya. I'm sorry about your friend, and I'm sorry it took 3 years for someone to recognize what you've been carrying. Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of grease across her cheek. I'm not looking for sympathy, Colonel. I'm just trying to get to Colorado Springs. Where are you headed after that? Everywhere, Maya said, glancing at Sarah's photograph. Every state, every base. She made me promise to wear my uniform again, to show what real leadership looks like. To remind people that rank isn't what makes someone a leader. Sullivan nodded slowly. That's a hell of a promise to keep. It's the only one that matters. In the distance, they could hear the sound of an approaching vehicle. The motor pool mechanic, Maya assumed. But for now, in this moment, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Recognition. Not pity, not concern, but genuine acknowledgement of who she'd been and what she'd lost. Colonel, she said quietly. Thank you for seeing me. Ma'am, he replied. It's an honor. As the mechanic's truck pulled up, Maya looked once more at Sarah's photograph. For the first time since leaving Tallahassee, she felt like she might actually be able to keep her promise. But she also felt something else, a nagging sensation that this encounter was just the beginning of something larger, something that would force her to confront not just her past, but the question of what came next. The car's engine might be fixable, but Maya was beginning to realize that some things, some people, couldn't be repaired. They could only be reborn. The motor pool mechanic, a weathered staff sergeant named Diego Ramirez, worked with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 20 years keeping military vehicles running in deserts and mountains around the world. Maya watched him from the shade of a pine tree, sipping water from a bottle Colonel Sullivan had produced from his SUV. Your friend knew her stuff, Ramirez called out, his voice muffled by the car's hood. This jury rigging is military grade. Whoever taught you to work on engines knew what they were doing. She taught herself, Maya said quietly. Always said you can't depend on other people to keep you moving. Smart woman. Ramirez straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. This will run another 100,000 miles easy. Just needed some TLC. Colonel Sullivan checked his watch. Sergeant, when you're finished, would you mind giving Captain Jenkins a full inspection? I want to make sure she's road ready. Already on it, sir. Maya studied Sullivan's profile as he watched Ramirez work. There was something deliberate about his attention, like he was buying time for something. She'd seen that look before, usually right before someone dropped bad news or made a request that couldn't be refused. "Colonel," she said carefully. "I appreciate the help, but I get the feeling there's something you're not telling me." Sullivan smiled grimly. 12 years of service and you still read people like tactical manuals. Some things never change. So what is it? "I've been in command of this base for 2 years, he said, leaning against the SUV's bumper. "Good soldiers, solid training, but they're missing something. Something I can't teach them in a classroom or a field exercise." Maya raised an eyebrow. "And that is?" "Understanding. About what service really means, about what it costs." He paused, watching a formation of soldiers march past in the distance. "These kids, they know the manual. They know the drills, but they don't know why any of it matters. And you think I do? I think you and Sarachan paid a price that most people can't comprehend. And I think there's value in that story being told." Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest. "I'm not a motivational speaker, Colonel. I'm barely functional most days." "That's exactly why they need to hear from you." "No." The word came out harder than Maya intended. "I'm not performing my trauma for a bunch of kids who think war is Call of Duty with better graphics." Sullivan's expression didn't change, but Maya caught a flicker of something: disappointment, frustration. It was gone before she could identify it. "I understand," he said simply. "But the offer stands. If you change your mind." Ramirez slammed the hood shut. "She's ready to roll, ma'am. Changed the oil, topped off the fluids, even patched that small leak in your exhaust. Should purr like a kitten." Maya pushed herself off the tree and walked toward the car. The sun was starting to lower, casting long shadows across the asphalt. She needed to get moving if she wanted to make Colorado Springs before dark. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said, shaking Ramirez's hand. "And thank you, Colonel, for everything. Safe travels, Captain Jenkins. And remember, my offer stands." Maya climbed into the car and started the engine. Ramirez was right. It purred. She put it in drive and had started to pull away when she caught sight of the 3 soldiers from earlier. They were standing at attention beside their Humvee, and as she passed, they saluted in unison. It was a small gesture, but it hit Maya harder than she expected. She pulled over about a mile down the road, her hand shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. "Damn it, Sarah," she whispered to the photograph. "What am I supposed to do with this?" The photo didn't answer, but Maya could almost hear Sarah's voice. "You're supposed to stop being a coward and start being who you used to be." Maya sat there for a long time, watching the sun sink lower over the trees. She thought about the young soldiers, about their earnest faces and crisp uniforms. She thought about herself at their age, full of conviction and certainty about right and wrong. She thought about the moment in Fallujah when that certainty had died along with her best friend. Finally, she picked up her phone and dialed the number on the business card Colonel Sullivan had pressed into her hand. "Fort Hamilton, Colonel Sullivan's office. This is Maya Jenkins. I need to speak with the Colonel." "One moment, please." Sullivan's voice came on the line almost immediately. "Captain Jenkins." "Your offer," Maya said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "I'll do it, but I have conditions." "Name them." "No cameras, no press, no ceremony. Just soldiers who want to listen." "Done. And I tell the story my way. The real story, not some sanitized version that makes everyone feel good about themselves. I wouldn't want it any other way." Maya closed her eyes, feeling like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. "Tomorrow morning, 1 hour, then I'm gone. Thank you, Captain Jenkins. You have no idea what this means. I hope you're right about that, Colonel, because if this goes wrong, I'm taking you down with me." Sullivan's laugh was warm and genuine. "Ma'am, I've been in worse foxholes with less reliable allies. I'll take my chances." Maya hung up the phone and looked at Sarah's photograph one more time. "Okay, girl," she said quietly. Let's see if I remember how to be brave. Maya didn't sleep well that night. She'd found a small motel 20 minutes from the base, the kind of place that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions about guests who paid cash. She lay on the thin mattress staring at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the hum of the air conditioner that worked about as well as her own emotional thermostat. After tossing and turning for hours, she finally gave up and opened the duffel bag she'd been carrying across the country. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was her dress uniform. She hadn't worn it since her medical discharge ceremony, a brief, awkward affair where a general she'd never met handed her a Purple Heart and thanked her for her service while avoiding eye contact. The uniform was still crisp, the creases sharp, the brass buttons polished to a high shine. Maya had maintained it meticulously even as she let herself fall apart. She ran her fingers over the ribbons, campaign medals, commendation ribbons, the symbols of a career spent in places most Americans couldn't find on a map, doing things most civilians couldn't imagine. And near her heart, the Purple Heart. The medal she'd earned when an IED tore through her convoy outside Baghdad. The medal that marked the day she lost not just blood and bone, but faith. "How am I supposed to do this, Sarah?" she whispered to the empty room. "How do I tell them what it was really like when I can barely stand to remember it myself?" At 0500, Maya gave up on sleep and drove back to Fort Hamilton. She parked in the visitor's lot, her dress uniform feeling simultaneously like armor and a prison. Every movement was restricted, every breath measured against the starched fabric. She'd forgotten how uncomfortable it was to dress for ceremony when your body carried the scars of combat. The base was already alive with morning activity. Soldiers jogged in formation, their cadence echoing across the parade ground. Fresh-faced kids heading to chow halls and equipment checks, probably complaining about the early hour while secretly loving the sense of purpose it gave them. Maya remembered that feeling, the certainty that came with belonging to something bigger than yourself, before she learned that sometimes the thing you belonged to could abandon you when you needed it most. Colonel Sullivan met her at the gate, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Black, 2 sugars," he said, offering her one. "Sergeant Ramirez mentioned that's how you take it." "Good intel," Maya said, accepting the cup. The coffee was strong and sweet, exactly what she needed. "Where are we doing this?" "Conference room in the training building. About 60 soldiers, all volunteers. Mix of ranks and experience levels." 60? Maya's stomach clenched. "You said small group." "For an army base, 60 is intimate. Most of these presentations are for hundreds." Maya took a long sip of coffee, using the time to steady herself. "What did you tell them?" "That they were going to hear from someone who'd been where they might be going. Someone who understood the cost of service in a way that most people never would." "And they volunteered for that?" "Standing room only. Had to turn people away." They walked across the base in comfortable silence, Maya's polished shoes crunching on the gravel paths she'd once known by heart. Every military installation had the same rhythm, the same energy. It was like coming home to a place you'd never wanted to leave. The training building was a squat concrete structure that had probably been built in the 1960s and updated with the bare minimum required to keep it functional. Sullivan led her to a side door marked Conference Room B, where she could hear the low murmur of conversation. "You ready?" he asked. Maya thought about Sarah's last words to her, spoken over a crackling radio with gunfire in the background. "Don't you dare waste this, Maya. Don't you dare waste what I'm giving you." "No," she said, "but I'm going anyway." Sullivan opened the door, and Maya stepped into a room that fell silent the moment she appeared. 60 soldiers, just as promised. Young faces, older faces, but all of them focused on her with the kind of attention that made her skin crawl. She walked to the front of the room where someone had set up a small podium with a microphone. Maya looked at it, then pushed it aside and perched on the edge of the desk instead. "I'm not going to use this," she said, her voice carrying easily across the room. "If you can't hear me, raise your hand and I'll speak up." A few nervous chuckles, but mostly silence. Maya scanned the room, taking in the faces. Some eager, some skeptical, some that reminded her painfully of herself at their age. "Colonel Sullivan asked me to talk to you about service," she began. "About what it means and what it costs." I told him I wasn't qualified, but he insisted. "So, here's what I want you to understand right up front. I'm not here to inspire you. I'm not here to make you feel good about your choices. I'm here to tell you a story about what happens when the system you serve decides you're expendable." The room was dead quiet now. Maya could see a few soldiers shifting uncomfortably in their seats, but no one looked away. 12 years ago, I was part of a unit that officially never existed. We called ourselves the Phantom Unit, and we did the jobs that regular units couldn't do. The jobs that required complete deniability if things went wrong. Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out a small photograph. Not the one from her dashboard, but another one. This one showed 7 soldiers in full combat gear, faces painted with camouflage, eyes hard with the kind of confidence that comes from surviving things that would break most people. "This was taken 3 days before the mission that ended my military career," she said, holding up the photo. 7 of us went into Fallujah to extract intelligence from a compound that was supposed to be lightly defended. What we found instead was a trap that cost the lives of 5 American soldiers and changed everything I thought I knew about duty and honor." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. "The woman sitting next to me in this picture is Sarah Chen. She was my best friend, my battle buddy, and the bravest person I've ever known. She died in that sector. And for 3 years, I've been telling myself it was her choice. That she chose to sacrifice herself for the mission, for the greater good. For all the reasons we tell ourselves when we need to sleep at night." Maya's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through it. "But the truth is, she died because the people who sent us there lied. They knew it was a trap. They knew we were walking into an ambush, and they sent us anyway because the Phantom Unit was expendable, because sometimes the system needs martyrs more than it needs heroes." The silence in the room was absolute now. Maya could see the shock on some faces, the recognition on others. These were soldiers who'd heard the rumors, who'd wondered about the operations that never made it into the history books. "So, here's what I want you to understand," Maya continued, her voice growing stronger. "The system you serve is flawed. It's run by people who make mistakes, who have agendas, who sometimes prioritize politics over people. And someday, some of you are going to be asked to pay the price for those mistakes." She stood up from the desk, her gaze sweeping across the room. "But that doesn't mean your service doesn't matter. It doesn't mean the sacrifices you're willing to make are meaningless. It just means you need to understand what you're really fighting for. Not for the politicians or the generals or the people who send you into harm's way. You fight for each other. You fight for the person standing next to you. Because at the end of the day, that's the only thing that's real. That's the only thing that matters." Maya picked up Sarah's photograph from the dashboard shot and held it up. "Sarah Chen fought for me. She died so I could live, so I could come home and tell this story. And for 3 years, I dishonored that sacrifice by hiding from the world, by letting the system break me instead of fighting back." She looked directly at Colonel Sullivan, who was standing at the back of the room. "But I'm not hiding anymore. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure Sarah's sacrifice means something. Making sure that the people who send you into harm's way understand that your lives have value beyond what they can accomplish on a battlefield." Maya folded the photograph carefully and put it back in her pocket. "That's my story," she said simply. "Take from it what you will. But remember this, you're not just soldiers. You're human beings with families and dreams and futures that matter. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." She started to walk toward the door, then paused and turned back. "And if anyone in this room ever finds themselves in a situation where they're being asked to choose between the mission and their people, remember Sarah Chen. Remember that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is refuse to let the system turn you into a casualty." Maya walked out of the room and didn't look back. Behind her, she could hear the sound of chairs scraping against the floor as 60 soldiers rose to their feet in silent salute. Maya made it halfway to her car before Colonel Sullivan caught up with her. His face was flushed, whether from running or emotion, she couldn't tell. "That wasn't what I expected," he said, slightly out of breath. "Good. Expectations are what get people killed." "Maya, wait." He grabbed her elbow gently, not restraining, but asking for her attention. "What you just did in there was a mistake," she finished. "I knew it the moment I walked in. Those kids don't need to hear about how broken the system is. They need to believe in something." "No," Sullivan said firmly. "They need to hear the truth. They need to understand what they're really signing up for." Maya pulled her arm free and continued walking toward her car. "What they need is to stay innocent as long as possible. What I just did was take that away from them. You gave them something more valuable than innocence. You gave them wisdom." "Wisdom?" Maya laughed bitterly. "I gave them nightmares. I gave them doubt. I gave them the same poison that's been eating at me for 3 years." They reached her car, and Maya fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking slightly. The adrenaline from the presentation was wearing off, leaving her feeling hollow and exposed. "You know what the worst part is," she said, not looking at Sullivan. "I actually felt good up there. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I had a purpose. Like I was honoring Sarah's memory by telling the truth about what happened to us." "Because you were." "No, I was just spreading my own bitterness, my own inability to move on." She finally got the key in the lock and opened the car door. "Sarah would have hated what I just did. She believed in the mission even at the end. She believed in the system even when it failed her." Sullivan was quiet for a long moment, then said, "You know, I was there when the after-action report came in from Fallujah. I was the one who had to brief the families." Maya froze, her hand on the door handle. "What you don't know," Sullivan continued, "is that your friend's last communication wasn't tactical. It wasn't about the mission or the enemy positions. It was about you." Maya turned slowly, her eyes searching his face. "She told the pilot to make sure Maya Jenkins made it home. She said you had a story to tell and that the story mattered more than the mission." Sullivan's voice was gentle but firm. "She didn't sacrifice herself for the system, Maya. She sacrificed herself for you, for your voice, for your ability to tell the truth about what happened." Maya felt her knees go weak. She leaned against the car, struggling to process what she just heard. "That's not possible," she whispered. "The radio was damaged. Communications were down. Emergency frequency, single transmission, clear as day." Sullivan pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. "I can put you in touch with the pilot if you want to hear it for yourself." Maya shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I can't. You've been carrying guilt that doesn't belong to you," Sullivan said quietly. "Sarah didn't die because the system failed her. She died because she chose to save you, because she knew you were the one who could make sure her death meant something." For 3 years, Maya had been tormented by the image of Sarah dying alone, abandoned by the system they both served. But now, hearing Sullivan's words, she realized she'd been carrying the wrong burden. Sarah hadn't died as a victim of the system. She'd died as its conscience. "Why didn't anyone tell me this before?" Maya asked. "Because the mission was classified, because the report was buried, because the people who knew were sworn to secrecy." Sullivan paused. "I'm probably violating about 12 different regulations by telling you now." Maya wiped her eyes and looked back toward the training building. Through the windows, she could see soldiers still milling around, some in small groups, others standing alone. They were processing what they'd heard, trying to fit it into their understanding of military service. "I need to go back in there," she said suddenly. "Maya, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. I left them with questions, but no answers. I told them the system was broken, but didn't give them any way to fix it." She started walking back toward the building, Sullivan falling into step beside her. "What are you going to tell them?" Maya thought about Sarah's last words. About the choice her friend had made, about the weight of carrying someone else's sacrifice. "The truth," she said, "all of it. The good and the bad, the ways the system fails and the ways it succeeds. The importance of questioning authority and the importance of believing in something bigger than yourself. That's a lot to balance. That's what wisdom is, Maya said, surprising herself with the words. It's not about having all the answers. It's about understanding that the questions are complicated and that simple answers usually aren't good enough. They reached the building, and Maya paused at the door. Through the glass, she could see the soldiers still gathered in the conference room, some arguing quietly, others sitting in contemplative silence. Sarah made a choice, she said to Sullivan. She chose to save me because she believed I had something important to say. For 3 years, I've been dishonoring that choice by staying silent, by hiding. Maya squared her shoulders and reached for the door handle. Now, I'm going to start earning the life she gave me. She opened the door and stepped back into the room. 60 pairs of eyes turned toward her, and she could see the confusion and uncertainty in their faces. But she could also see something else, hope, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she had more to offer than just criticism and doubt. I know what you're thinking, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. You're wondering if everything you believe in is a lie. If the system you've sworn to serve is worth the sacrifices you're willing to make. She walked to the front of the room and sat on the edge of the desk again. I can't answer that question for you. But I can tell you this. The system is only as good as the people who choose to serve it. And if you're in this room, if you volunteered to hear this story, then you're the kind of people who can make it better. The room was silent, but Maya could feel the attention, the engagement. These weren't just kids playing soldier anymore. They were adults grappling with adult questions about duty and honor and the price of service. My friend Sarachan died to save my life, Maya continued. But more than that, she died to save my voice. She knew that I would have questions about what happened to us, about the choices that were made, about the price we paid, and she wanted me to be alive to ask those questions. Maya stood up and began pacing slowly across the front of the room. That's what I'm asking you to do. Ask questions. Hold the system accountable. Demand better from your leaders. But don't let cynicism replace commitment. Don't let doubt replace dedication. Because at the end of the day, the system is just a collection of people making choices. And if you're not part of making those choices, then you're just letting other people decide what your service means. She stopped pacing and looked directly at the soldiers in the front row. Sarachan chose to die for something she believed in. Not because she was naive or brainwashed, but because she understood that someone had to be willing to pay the price for the values we claim to defend. Freedom, justice, the protection of those who can't protect themselves. These aren't just words. They're principles worth dying for. Maya paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. But they're also principles worth living for, worth fighting for every day in every decision you make, in every order you follow or refuse to follow. Because that's what service really means. It's not about blind obedience. It's about choosing every day to be part of something bigger than yourself. She walked back to the desk and picked up her coffee cup, taking a sip of the now cold liquid. I'm going to be driving across this country for the next few months, visiting every state, seeing what Sarah and I fought for, what all of you are fighting for. And I'm going to be asking questions, hard questions, about whether we're living up to the values we claim to defend. Maya set down the cup and looked around the room one more time. If any of you want to be part of that conversation, if you want to help me understand what service means to your generation, you know how to find me. I'll be the woman in the beat-up sedan with too many questions and not enough answers. She started toward the door again, then paused. And remember, Sarachan didn't die so you could serve blindly. She died so you could serve wisely. Don't let her down. This time when Maya walked out of the room, she could hear something different behind her. Not just the scraping of chairs as soldiers stood to salute, but the sound of voices, questions being asked, conversations being started, the beginning of the kind of dialogue that Sarah would have wanted. For the first time in 3 years, Maya felt like she was finally moving in the right direction. 3 weeks later, Maya's phone wouldn't stop ringing. She was somewhere outside Denver, pulled over at a truck stop to fix a loose fan belt, when the calls started coming in. First from Colonel Sullivan, then from soldiers she'd never heard of, then from journalists who'd somehow gotten wind of what had happened at Fort Hamilton. "Ma'am, this is Sergeant First Class Martin Rodriguez from Fort Carson. I heard about what you did at Hamilton. My unit would like to invite you to speak." Maya hung up and turned off the phone. She'd been naive to think that what happened in that conference room would stay contained. In the age of social media and instant communication, nothing stayed secret for long, especially not a story about a mysterious veteran with a classified past who challenged 60 soldiers to think critically about their service. The car's engine coughed to life and Maya pulled back onto the highway. Sarah's photograph still sat on the dashboard, but now it was accompanied by a small stack of business cards from soldiers who'd approached her after the presentation. Young faces with old questions, looking for guidance from someone who'd been where they were going. She'd thrown most of the cards away. This wasn't supposed to be about building a movement or becoming some kind of guru. It was supposed to be about keeping a promise to a dead friend. But the calls kept coming. Maya's phone buzzed again, and this time she recognized the number. Colonel Sullivan. Against her better judgment, she answered. "I told you no press," she said without preamble. "I didn't call any press," Sullivan replied. "But I can't control what the soldiers in that room chose to do with their own social media accounts." "What are you talking about?" "Check your email when you get a chance. Or better yet, look up #Sarachan on any social platform." Maya felt her stomach drop. "James, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything. Your story did this. The soldiers you spoke to, they've been sharing it, talking about it, using it to start conversations about what service really means." Maya pulled over again, this time at a rest area overlooking a valley filled with rolling hills and farmland. She turned on her phone's data and searched for the hashtag Sullivan had mentioned. The results made her dizzy. Hundreds of posts, thousands of shares, videos of soldiers talking about duty and sacrifice and the importance of questioning authority, photos of Sarah's memorial page being shared by people who'd never heard her name a month ago. And at the center of it all, grainy cell phone footage of Maya's presentation at Fort Hamilton. Someone had recorded it despite the no-camera rule, and now it was spreading across the internet like wildfire. "This is a nightmare," Maya whispered. "This is what Sarah wanted," Sullivan said gently. "This is why she made that choice in Fallujah. She knew you had something important to say, and she wanted to make sure you survived to say it. I never wanted to be a public figure. I never wanted to be the face of some movement. Then don't be, but don't run away from it either. Use it." Maya watched a military convoy pass by on the highway below. Young soldiers headed to who knows where, for who knows what purpose. In a few hours, those soldiers would probably see the video of her presentation. They'd start asking their own questions about duty and honor and the price of service. "Use it how?" she asked. "Turn it into something constructive. You're already driving across the country. Why not make it official? Visit bases, talk to soldiers, help them understand what you've learned. That's not what this trip is about. Isn't it? You said you wanted to see what you and Sarah fought for. Well, what you fought for is sitting in barracks and mess halls across this country trying to figure out how to serve with honor in a complicated world." Maya closed her eyes and leaned back in the driver's seat. Through the open windows, she could hear the sound of wind through the trees, the distant hum of traffic, the ordinary sounds of a country at peace, a country that Sarah had died to protect. "If I do this," Maya said slowly, "I do it my way. No handlers, no script, no sugarcoating the hard truths." "Agreed. And I want something in return." "Name it." "I want access to Sarah's full military record. Everything, including the classified stuff." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Maya, that's not something I can just, then find someone who can, because if I'm going to be telling her story, I want to make sure I'm telling all of it." Another pause, then a sigh. "I'll make some calls. Thank you, James. For what it's worth, I think Sarah would be proud of what you're doing." Maya looked at the photograph on her dashboard, at Sarah's confident smile and bright eyes. "I hope so, James, because I'm about to honor her memory in ways that are going to make a lot of people very uncomfortable." After hanging up, Maya sat in the car for a long time, watching the sun set over the Colorado hills. She thought about the path that had brought her here, from the isolation of her Tallahassee house to an Oklahoma highway to this moment of decision. She thought about the young soldiers who'd be watching her video tonight, wrestling with questions about duty and honor that had no easy answers. She thought about Sarah, alone in that sector, making the choice that would define both their legacies. Finally, she started the car and pulled back onto the highway. She had a promise to keep, but now she understood that the promise was bigger than just wearing a uniform again. It was about helping others understand what that uniform truly meant, not through rose-colored glasses, but with the clear eyes of people who understood the true cost of freedom. The road ahead was long, and Maya was just getting started. 6 months later, Maya sat in a congressional hearing room facing a panel of lawmakers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The room was packed with reporters, veterans, advocates, and military personnel, all drawn by the controversy that had been building around Maya's cross-country tour. What had started as a simple promise to a dead friend had become something much larger and much more dangerous to the people who preferred their military stories simple and sanitized. "Captain Jenkins," Congresswoman Eva Whitfield began, her voice carrying the particular blend of authority and condescension that Maya had learned to recognize in politicians. "You've made some very serious allegations about military leadership and operational security. Do you have evidence to support these claims?" Maya looked down at the folder in front of her. 3 weeks ago, Colonel Sullivan had kept his promise and delivered Sarah's complete military record, including the classified after-action reports from Fallujah. What Maya had found there had changed everything. "Congresswoman Whitfield," she said calmly, "I have more evidence than you're prepared to handle." She opened the folder and pulled out a document marked with classification stamps and redaction marks. "This is the original mission briefing for Operation Sandstorm, the mission that resulted in the death of Sarah Chen and 4 other American soldiers. According to this document, military intelligence had confirmed the presence of at least 30 enemy combatants in the target area. The briefing given to my unit indicated we'd be facing minimal resistance." A murmur ran through the gallery. Whitfield's face flushed slightly. "Captain Jenkins, you cannot discuss classified information in an open hearing." "I can discuss declassified information," Maya interrupted, holding up another document. "This is a declassification order signed yesterday by the Secretary of Defense. Apparently, someone in the Pentagon decided the American people deserve to know the truth about what happened in Fallujah." The murmur in the gallery grew louder. Maya could see reporters frantically typing on their phones, and she knew that within minutes the story would be spreading across every news platform in the country. Furthermore, Maya continued, pulling out another document. "This is the communication log from the night of the mission. It clearly shows that my unit requested extraction 3 times after discovering the true nature of the enemy presence. All 3 requests were denied." Congressman Jason Martinez, who'd been quiet until now, leaned forward in his chair. "Captain Jenkins, are you alleging that American soldiers were deliberately sent into a trap?" "I'm alleging that someone decided the intelligence my unit could gather was worth more than our lives. I'm alleging that Sarah Chen and 4 other soldiers died not for their country, but for someone's career ambitions." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Military personnel argued in heated whispers, and the panel struggled to maintain order. Through it all, Maya sat calmly, her hand resting on Sarah's photograph, which she'd placed on the table in front of her. "Order!" Whitfield shouted, banging her gavel. "I will have order in this chamber." When the room finally quieted, Maya continued as if nothing had happened. "For 6 months, I've been traveling across this country speaking to soldiers about duty and honor and the price of service. What I've learned is that there are thousands of men and women in uniform who are asking the same questions I've been asking. Questions about whether their sacrifices matter. Questions about whether their leaders see them as human beings or just chess pieces to be moved around a board." She stood up, ignoring the protests from the panel. I've also learned that there are leaders like Colonel James Sullivan, who understand that accountability isn't the enemy of military effectiveness, it's the foundation of it. Leaders who know that soldiers fight better when they trust that their lives won't be wasted on missions designed to cover up someone else's mistakes. Maya picked up Sarah's photograph and held it up for the room to see. Sarah Chen died believing she was serving something bigger than herself. She died believing that her sacrifice would protect innocent people and defend American values. What she actually died for was a classified intelligence operation that was already compromised before we ever set foot in that sector. The room was dead silent now. Even the reporters had stopped typing, transfixed by the raw emotion in Maya's voice. "But here's what I want you to understand," Maya said, her voice rising slightly. "Sarah's death wasn't meaningless because the mission was flawed. Her death was meaningful because she chose to save my life, knowing that I would survive to tell this story. She died so that someone would be alive to ask these questions, to demand better from the system we all serve." Maya walked around the table, moving closer to the panel. "I'm not here to destroy the military or undermine national security. I'm here to remind you that the men and women who serve deserve leaders who value their lives as much as they value their missions. They deserve commanders who won't send them into harm's way unless there's a clear, achievable objective that serves the national interest." She stopped directly in front of Congresswoman Whitfield. "And they deserve representatives who will ask the hard questions when those standards aren't met." Whitfield cleared her throat nervously. "Captain Jenkins, while your concerns are noted, we must also consider the broader implications of second-guessing military leadership." "The broader implications," Maya interrupted, "are that we might actually start winning the wars we fight instead of just prolonging them until everyone forgets why we started them." The gallery erupted again, but this time with applause. Maya could see military personnel throughout the room standing and clapping, their faces reflecting a mixture of vindication and hope. As the chaos continued around her, Maya looked down at Sarah's photograph one more time. Her friend's smile seemed brighter somehow, more real than it had in years. "I kept my promise, Sarah," she whispered. "I saw what we fought for, and now I'm going to make sure it was worth what you gave up." 1 year later, Maya stood on the steps of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, Sarah's photograph in her hands. The black granite wall stretched out before her, reflecting the faces of visitors who'd come to remember their own losses. The past year had been a whirlwind of change. The congressional hearing had led to investigations, resignations, and reforms that were still being implemented. Maya's story had sparked a national conversation about military accountability and the treatment of veterans. Books had been written, documentaries filmed, and policies changed. But for Maya, the most important change was the simplest one. She was no longer hiding. "You made quite an impression on those politicians," a familiar voice said behind her. Maya turned to see Colonel Sullivan approaching, dressed in civilian clothes, but still carrying himself with military bearing. "James," she said warmly. "I wasn't sure you'd come. Wouldn't miss it. Besides, I wanted to see how the story ends." "It doesn't end," Maya said, looking back at the wall. "It just continues. Different chapters, same themes. Any regrets?" Maya considered the question. The past year had cost her whatever privacy she'd managed to maintain, but it had also given her something she'd never expected: purpose. The speaking tour that had grown out of her congressional testimony had taken her to military bases around the world, where she'd met thousands of soldiers grappling with the same questions she'd wrestled with. "Ask me again in 10 years, she said finally. "When we know whether any of this actually made a difference." "It's already making a difference. The new accountability protocols, the whistleblower protections, the mental health resources, those are policy changes," Maya interrupted. "I'm talking about cultural change. Whether the next generation of military leaders will remember that their first duty is to the people they command, not the missions they're assigned." Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. "You know, there's something I never told you about that day at Fort Hamilton." "What's that?" "I wasn't there by accident. I'd been tracking your movement across the country, reading the reports from other bases about this mysterious veteran who was asking uncomfortable questions." Maya raised an eyebrow. You were investigating me. I was trying to understand who you were, what you represented, whether you were a threat to military discipline or, he paused, something else. And what did you conclude? That you were exactly what we needed. Someone with the credibility to ask the hard questions and the courage to demand honest answers. Maya touched Sarah's photograph gently, feeling the worn edges beneath her fingers. Sarah would have been better at this than me, she said quietly. She always knew how to inspire people without making them angry. Maybe, but she also knew that sometimes anger is the appropriate response. Sometimes the system needs to be shaken up before it can be fixed. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching other visitors leave flowers and flags at the base of the memorial, young and old, military and civilian, all united by their connection to the sacrifice represented by the names on the wall. Well, I got a call yesterday, Maya said eventually. From a lieutenant at Fort Bragg. She wanted to report a safety violation that her commander was covering up. And? 3 years ago, she would have kept quiet and hoped for the best. And now she knows she has options. She knows there are people who will listen and systems in place to protect her. Maya pulled out her phone and showed Sullivan a photo. Dozens of soldiers gathered around a makeshift memorial in Iraq, holding pictures of fallen comrades. This was sent to me by a unit in Baghdad. They started something they call promise keeping, taking photos of their fallen friends to significant places, sharing stories about who they were beyond their service records. Like what you did with Sarah. Exactly like what I did with Sarah. Except now there are hundreds of people doing it. Thousands maybe. Maya put the phone away and looked back at the memorial wall. You know what I realized somewhere around mile marker 50,000? This was never about the drive across the country. It was about the conversations, the connections. The way people respond when you treat their service as something sacred instead of something owed. And the car? Maya laughed. Still running. Ramirez's maintenance schedule is apparently bulletproof, though I'm thinking about upgrading to something with better air conditioning. Where next? There's a military academy in Virginia that wants to include Sarah's story in their ethics curriculum. And a VA hospital in Texas that's starting a program for veterans dealing with survivor's guilt. Maya paused. Turns out there are a lot of us. That surprises you? It did. I thought I was the only one carrying this kind of weight. But it turns out that every unit, every deployment, every mission leaves someone behind who has to figure out how to live with what they've seen and what they've lost. Maya walked closer to the memorial wall and found a spot where the black granite reflected her face clearly. For a moment, she could see both herself and Sarah in the reflection, side by side like they'd been in that photograph. The other thing I realized, she said, still looking at her reflection, is that Sarah didn't just die to save my life. She died to save my ability to live with myself afterward. She knew that if I didn't make it home, I'd never forgive myself. And she knew that if I did make it home but didn't do anything meaningful with the time she gave me, I'd never forgive myself for that either. Sounds like she knew you pretty well. Better than I knew myself, apparently. Maya placed Sarah's photograph against the base of the memorial, propping it up next to a small American flag someone else had left behind. I'm not leaving this here, she said, seeing Sullivan's questioning look. Just giving her a moment to visit with the others. To be part of something bigger than our story. They stepped back and watched as other visitors noticed the photograph, some stopping to read the small placard Maya had attached, Saracen, 7th Special Operations Group. She died so others could live to ask the hard questions. You know, Sullivan said quietly, I think she'd be proud of what you've built. It's not finished yet, Maya replied. I don't think it ever will be. But that's okay. The best promises aren't the ones you keep once and forget about. They're the ones you keep every day in small ways for as long as you're alive to keep them. Maya picked up Sarah's photograph and walked back toward the parking area where her car waited. The old vehicle looked exactly the same as it had that day outside Fort Hamilton, except for the new bumper stickers that had accumulated over the months, messages of support from veterans groups, base coordinates from places she'd visited, and a simple white sticker with black letters that read Promise Keeper. "One more question," Sullivan said as they reached the car. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd just fixed that hose and driven away that day? If we'd never met, never had that conversation?" Maya considered this, key in hand, car door half open. "I think about it sometimes," she said finally. "But then I remember something Sarah used to say. The universe doesn't give you choices, Maya, it gives you opportunities to become who you're supposed to be." She climbed into the car and started the engine. Through the open window, she could see her reflection in the memorial wall one more time, but now she looked different, stronger, more complete. "See you around, James," she said. "And thanks for seeing me that day, for helping me remember who I used to be." "Thank you," he replied, "for helping me remember why any of this matters." Maya put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking area. In her rearview mirror, she could see Sullivan standing at attention, watching her leave. On the dashboard, Sarah's photograph caught the afternoon sunlight, her smile as bright and confident as ever. Next to it, Maya had placed the silver coin Colonel Sullivan had given her, along with dozens of others from soldiers she'd met along the way, each one representing a conversation, a connection, a small victory in the larger battle for accountability and honor. The road stretched ahead of her as she merged onto the highway, no longer empty but full of purpose and possibility. Her phone buzzed with messages from soldiers seeking guidance, from journalists wanting interviews, from lawmakers asking for her input on new legislation. But most importantly, from people who had heard her story and found in it the courage to tell their own. A year ago, she'd been a ghost, hiding from the world in a house in Tallahassee. Now she was fully present, engaged in the hard work of transforming grief into action. The uniform she'd once been afraid to wear had become a symbol not of blind obedience, but of conscious commitment, a commitment to honor Sarah's memory by demanding better from the system they'd both served. Maya turned on the radio, letting the music fill the car as she drove. The sun was setting behind her, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that reminded her of Sarah's smile. And for the first time since Fallujah, Maya Jenkins was exactly where she was supposed to be, not running from her past, but using it to shape a better future. Leadership isn't about rank, she had told a group of cadets the day before. It's about responsibility. It's about standing up when others sit down. It's about speaking truth when others stay silent. And sometimes, it's about being willing to risk everything for the people who trust you with their lives. She glanced at the photograph one more time and smiled. "I get it now, Sarah," she whispered. "I finally understand what you were trying to teach me all along." The miles rolled by beneath her wheels, each one bringing her closer to the next base, the next conversation, the next opportunity to transform a system from within. Maya had learned that true courage wasn't found in the heat of battle, but in the quiet moments afterward, in the choices made when no one was watching. As she drove into the gathering dusk, Maya knew that some might still see her as a troublemaker, a whistleblower, a threat to the status quo. But those who mattered, those who wore the uniform not for status or power but out of genuine dedication, they saw her for what she truly was, a keeper of promises, a voice for the voiceless, a leader who understood that sometimes the most patriotic act is to question, to challenge, to demand better. And as the lights of a distant military base appeared on the horizon, Maya felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living with purpose. And in doing so, she was honoring not just Sarah's sacrifice, but the sacrifices of all those who had given everything for a promise of something better. The car's engine hummed smoothly as Maya Jenkins, formerly captain of the 7th Special Operations Group, currently of wherever the road led her, drove toward her next mission, carrying the weight of the dead and the hope of the living in equal measure. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.